Hey, so this talk tonight, one of the things I kind of had a hard time with was coming up with a title for it because it it, it really originated for me kind of a deeper dive of an exploration in that I was various things that I've been reading or talks I've been listening to, books. I kept coming up with um, uh, the the importance of dukkha, of suffering. I mean, yeah, it's the first noble truth. So should have known that. But I realized that also it's often the beginning spot, not only of the cycle of suffering, but it's also the beginning of the way out of suffering and or dukkha. And and in that way, I was intrigued to kind of look at it in a little different way. So this ends up being really a two-part talk. Tonight I'm going to talk about the first two um, noble truths in a little different way than normally that I would have approached it, and then the second part, which actually I will do on Zoom Thursday night, and I hope to record it, um, would be more about the third and the fourth, the way out. I'll give you a little taste of so, so you don't go home just kind of absorbed in dukkha. Um, so if you think about it, for example, how many of you are familiar with uh, the teaching of dependent origination? Does anyone not know that teaching? Okay, so I'll give you a little just brief summary. It's probably one of the four top or really most important of the Buddha's teachings, I would think. And it's about this cycle that it gets divided into 12 pieces, but a cycle that we all go through, that everyone experiences. And it's kind of like the cycle of karma. But we start out, and this could be a lifetime, this could be a moment, this could be um, a breath or a day, um, with a sense of unknowing, but not things aren't quite right. You know, it could ignorance is a good way to describe it. And then we go through this process of bringing our past experiences into to the present moment, of having the sensation of wanting, or first of all starting with enjoying something, liking it or not liking it or not sure, and moving towards uh, trying to get more of it or get less of it, push it away. And when we do that, we're beginning to work with this sense of being attached, of craving, of wanting more, or not wanting it. And so that cycle takes us through to suffering, to ending up with discomfort, and then we start all over again, and we do it again and again and again. Um, and it's more complex than that, but that'll give you a little understanding of it. And so what the questions that it came up for me about it is, so what is this about? So I thought I'd start by talking about this word dukkha and what it really means, and how come it's so hard to put your finger on. The word is typically described as suffering or translated. It's a Pali word, and it's translated as suffering. And I think the reason that suffering has been chosen as a sort of major way to translate it is that it's about pain, but pain that gets attached, how we attach ourselves to pain. And and in so doing, in attaching ourselves to pain because we don't want it, um, because or because we are trying to do something about it, we create this cycle. We create uh, this repetitive trying to find a way out, going around and round and coming most of the time right back where we started. And so so this is the cycle, and so one thing leads to another, and at the and the truth of that is so apparent. But one of the things that I've been sort of marveling at as all this new stuff with artificial intelligence and is it good? Is it bad? Is it what is it? Um, is how uncanny it is in a way. And I don't know if you've had this experience. Some of you have, I'm sure. You're writing a text message and it starts popping up with the next word, and oh yeah, that's it. And pretty soon you can just write this whole message, and you have never had to have almost even think about it. It writes it for you, and so so that that's our cycle, that's our pattern, and it's easy to find or see. It's very predictable. So that's why this word of dukkha, because of the uh, it's about pain, but it's not pain. It's pain that we get absorbed in and lost in. But there are other words that help to fill out the understanding of the concept of dukkha. So one is just discomfort. Another is unsatisfactoriness, which I really like just because, we can always often feel a little bit unsatisfactory. It's not quite right. It's pretty good, but not quite right. Um, Stress is another way that sometimes it can be interpreting dukkha, the contraction when we feel this drive um, that we can't relax around. And also sometimes it can manifest as a kind of disconnectedness, a feeling that we don't belong or we're kind of isolated. Um, I was once in a training where it was actually about diversity, but there was a little workshop that was part of this training, and what came out of it and what the leaders or teachers that were conducting it uh, demonstrated is that everyone in this room, and there was 100 people, um, all felt like they were outside the circle. They didn't quite belong, and it was one of those experiences where it was a tremendous relief to realize, oh, I'm not alone with this feeling. But that's something that is that happens for us. It's a form of dukkha. Um, there's also uh, just that feeling something's not quite right, uh, sort of dis-ease. So we're all out of it. And then there's the feeling of having a loss of control. And that one is one I really kind of want to highlight because I think it's an aspect, um, it's a way to describe a lot of the dukkha, the discontent that people are feeling uh, in this time, in this as individuals and as collectives. There's a sense, and I'm assuming that a lot of you feel this too, that things are totally out of control. who's who's in charge here? What's what what is and what are we going to do about it? So we, as individuals, last time I was here, we talked about the climate crisis and the fact that one of the sort of disincentives for people to do something is to feel like, what am I going to do? Here we are with 7 billion people or however billion people we have. My contribution isn't going to mean anything. So there's this feeling that we don't have control. And you know, I'm I've lived a full lifetime already, which is I'm grateful for. And I've experienced in that lifetime a lot of things, wars and famines and disasters in the world, losses and crises in my personal life at times. Um, and I know that in the history of humanity, I don't really know what other people in other times experienced, but I know there were wars and famines, there were disasters, there was cruelty, and there was a lack of knowledge, and people didn't have a lot of the resources that we have now. But it's my sense that, and for me, um, I've never felt so overwhelmed by the confusion and the helplessness and the crisis for all beings that's being fueled by these poisons that the Buddha talked about of greed and hatred and anger and ignorance or delusion. Uh, I mean, at some level, we all know that nothing lasts, that that all conditioned things are impermanent. But we tend to forget that, and we get lost in various ways. So, and I just kind of thought I'd mention a few of the ways that we get lost. Get you a little more deeper into the dukkha here. Um, well, there's the hindrances. So the 5 hindrances are one is craving and attachment. So that may be the very main one, because when we're craving and attached, um, uh, we're in a cage. We're being um, contained, and we can't see the truth beyond wanting and craving. And then the kind of flip side of it is the not wanting, and which is a kind of wanting. It's wanting it to be different. It's wanting it to be gone away. It's wanting to have it go away, and so it's another form of craving. And then there's the what they call in the hindrances, they call it sloth and torpor, but it's also kind of this trance that we get into, this kind of in this cycle of we're going round and round, and there's a kind of fog that we can get into of forgetting, of not remembering to be in this moment and to be here. Um, and then there's one that's described as anxiety and restlessness, which I would say is kind of a symptom almost of this wanting it to be different. What are we going to do with this? And another, the fifth one, which is doubt, which is also a kind of symptom. It's like, maybe I just can't trust anything. How do I know this practice is right? How do I know this is what I should be doing? So there's all, and you can see how all of those kind of lead to this feeling of um, disconnectedness and such. And then there's a few others that we might add to that to just make it a little deeper. And one of those is this, or it's maybe they're just different ways of describing some of the same things, but there's this sense of the of the mind, the experience losing its fluidity, a kind of fixity, I guess, of where we're just stuck in this place, and and we can't. Um, I've heard, I was a psychotherapist for a number of years, and when people are in deep depression, they often talk about feeling like the whole world is moving outside of them, but they can't connect with it at all. So there's this stuckness. Um, and there's also this kind of another symptom in a way is losing. We get lost in what's going on, and we lose the sense of the body, which is, the body is a great teacher. When we can tap in and ask the body what's going on right now and feel the sensations, the tensions, the relaxation, or um, uh, the kinds of discomfort, and we pay attention to that. That's a teacher for us about where we're at and what we need. But we can lose that too when we get lost in um, whatever of the fears or concerns that we're connected to. So we've lost awareness of what's going on. And there's a kind of I heard it described by a teacher, that the loss of space or spaciousness. And the way he described it, he said, so supposing that you go into a room like this room with uh, a sangha, a room with people who are pretty much of like minds, but you're aware, or that one person in this room is very critical and very uh, uh, has a negative kind of feeling about you, or you think they do, or something like that, or they can have a different view and opinion. And I've had that experience. Probably some of us have had this too, in times, because there's so much division in the world right now, and in society and in cultures, and you go. One of the sanghas I teach at has a couple of people who have a very different opinion about the environment and about various hot topics. to these crises that we're experiencing. People are attached to their beliefs or their um, resistance to seeing things as they are, and um, and it's a serious problem. So oh, so then a couple of weeks ago, I listened to a couple of podcasts that some of you may have heard. I know somebody recommended it to me, and it's on that program called podcast called Hidden Brain, and it was a two-part uh, presentation interviewing this woman who's a psychiatrist and a professor and a researcher at Stanford. Her name is Anna Lembke, Lembeke, I guess, Lembke. The two names of the two interviews, one is called The Paradox of Pleasant, and the other is The Path to Enough. So right on, right on target with what this experience or this understanding is all about. Um, and she's a her focus in her work has been on addiction primarily, and and she has kind of broadened the concept of addiction. She started out working with mostly with people with drugs and alcohol addiction, and it's broadened out in a way that most of us can relate to having either currently or in the past, some points in our life, some forms of addiction that would fit this. Not maybe not everyone, but she even, in her work with this, she came to realize that she had an addiction that was an addiction to started out with what's the name of that vampire trilogy? Huh? The Twilight series. Yeah, yeah. She read the Twilight series 3 times, and then and then she got into all these vampire novels, and then she got into romance knowledge, and she was like just stuck. And then she, in this process, she thought she had an encounter with in a training where she realized that she had this addiction, and um, so it's pretty interesting. So she's written this book recently also called Dopamine Nation, Finding Balance in the Age of Indulgence. And one of the things that she points out is that the studies that have been done about people's degree of happiness, where they go all over the world and ask people how happy they are. I don't know how they do that exactly, but um, and what they have found is that um, the last 20 or 30 years, there's been a decrease in the level of happiness throughout the world. And that decrease is accelerated in the wealthiest nations. So the streets are lined with gold. Doesn't work so well. And so that reminds me of a quote from Sophocles, who said, "Nothing vast enters the world of mortals without a curse." So there's always a downside. And so what Anna Lembeke has developed is a theory about the relationship of dopamine to our mutual and individual loss of happiness, um, or to the increase in the experience of dukkha, or unsatisfactoriness. So, so dopamine, which is a hormone and a neurotransmitter, what it is, if you're not familiar with it, it's most notably involved in helping us to feel pleasure as part of the brain's reward system. So, sex, shopping, smelling cookies baking in the oven, all these things can trigger a dopamine release or a dopamine rush. So that expression, dopamine rush, is important because we can kind of relate to it when we feel this kind of rush. I remember um, reading a book years ago about addiction and alcoholism and addiction, and and one of the things, the only thing that really stayed with me from that book was a line that or a little piece where the author talked about the fact that the dopamine rush can actually comes when, for example, if someone is alcoholic and they're struggling with whether or not to drink, but um, they decide they're going to go into the bar and get a drink. At the moment they decide that they're going to go into the bar and get a drink, they get the dopamine rush. It's letting go of the struggle. So so this feel-good neurotransmitter is also involved in reinforcement. That's why once we try one of those cookies, we might come back for another cookie or still another cookie. And the darker side then, of course, of dopamine is the intense feeling of reward people feel when they take drugs or heroin or cocaine, and that can lead to for alcohol to this addiction. But what Anne uh, Lemke added is that um, that's not the only things that can lead to that, to those addictions. That there's other things, and what she in her research noted is that um, dopamine is processed in the same part of the lower part of the brain um, as pain. So pain and and pleasure processing happen side by side, and they're like a little seesaw. And so the body is designed to seek homeostasis. You know, that's a whole other thing that's really interesting to look at because we're trying to achieve balance, and how that impacts everything we do is interesting too because um, things are changing all the time. So that's a little hard to really stay with. But that's part of what the Buddha's teaching is about finding balance, about the middle way, about equanimity. All those things are expressions of being able to hold both sides and keep that seesaw from going wildly up and down. So when we experience a dopamine rush, it's going to be followed by a sense of loss and wanting more. That's just the nature of it. Um, but it's built in. And in the world of opulence and over opportunity to overindulge in substances and behaviors that provides uh, all these opportunities, you know, it's hard to escape them, right? I mean, I've sometimes I want to read something online in the newspaper or somewhere and just these ads come up and you know you need this, you want this, how about this, you know, trying to find something to grab my attention. And you know sometimes it happens, oh maybe I would like that, you know. So there's this built-in uh this kind of addiction disposition. And so we want, not only do we want drugs or alcohol, but there's gambling addictions, there's shopping addictions, video games, Amazon deliveries can be an addiction. Um, so, so what we see is that with this cycle, the another interesting part of it is that the more we succumb to the rush, and of course, the more pleasure it gives us, the more we want it. And so that it becomes more, both sides become more intense. They, or at least to maintain the intensity of the pleasure, we get more restless, more anxious, more striving to get whatever, to get the relief. And the withdrawal then is more and more painful, and the more frequently it's rewarded or indulged, the more severe the absence or the wanting becomes, and that's, I find, really interesting. So what do we do with this dilemma? How do we so that's Thursday. No, a little bit more here. So so it's interesting that again, to go back to this thing, that the path to freedom from this, there's a thing called the uh, the spiral path to freedom, and it starts, and the chain of dependent of transcendent origination both start with suffering, and the next step from suffering is faith. And so that the question is, what's that all about? How come suffering leads to faith? And so how does that happen? So it's partly that this, or maybe largely, that, until how many, I won't ask this question of all of you, but I've asked it other people, and I've heard it from a lot of people. A lot of people come to Buddhism because they're suffering, because they're they they hear that, this is a possibility. So suffering, the discomfort of it leads to seeking. It leads us to wanting to find something. Well, the problem, of course, is that we can find this long list of things. But then they understand, if we get exposed and understand the truth of impermanence, the truth that that things are not, don't stay, don't last, and that there is the way out, which the Buddha taught. Um, so the answers begin, of course, with mindfulness and the realization that insatiable wanting is what creates dukkha and suffering. So a whole lot more about that, but I'm not going to get into it tonight because obviously we don't have time. But so I'm going to read a poem, and then we'll open it to some questions, and then we'll have metta, and then we'll have a little talk from Jen. So this is Rumi. Your grief for what you've lost lifts a mirror up to where you're bravely working. Expecting the worst, you look, and instead, here's the joyful face you've been wanting to see. Your hand opens and closes and opens and closes. If it were always fist or always stretched open, you would be paralyzed. Your deepest presence is in every small contracting and expanding, the two as beautifully balanced and coordinated as bird wings. So did I say I was going to do meta now? I think, no, I'm going to do questions. Yeah. I just, that's how long my memory lasts. Okay. So comments and questions.
This is Robin over at Mountain Stream. Does anyone have questions in the in-person audience? No burning desires. Does anyone on the virtual audience have any questions? You can unmute yourself. Okay. So we have Lindsley. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question.
Okay. I went through a period of deep grief over the losses as a result of climate change. But then I sort of got out of that because I went back to Buddhist teaching about change and the inevitability of change, and thought basically that I didn't want anything to change. I wanted the world to be just like it always has been. I didn't want to lose, all the beautiful animals and plants that I enjoy. I'm kind of a naturalist. But when I realized that it was just basically, you could either call it chance or you could call it, dependent origination, that I lived at a time that was as stable as it was. That I was born when I was, and that I've lived at this time and been able to have so much stability in the climate and all the things that meant. And so that really all that is happening now is that we're, like many times before in the millions of years that the world has been here and that there have been living beings on the world, that I happen to be living at a time when it's probably going to change. In fact, it is already changing. And that really helped me settle sort of into acceptance, a deep acceptance of, okay, this is, it was great while it lasted, maybe you could say. But I don't feel as distraught anymore. I just feel more accepting. And I want my question for you then is, am I just avoiding something, or is that a reasonable sort of place to arrive at?
That's a great question, because I think I think it's that's a place where there's a lot of misunderstanding. On the one hand, we need to accept and be tolerant of discomfort, but we also need to cultivate and develop places to go. That when I was in the meditation, I described kind of feeling grounded, and once you feel grounded and you kind of know the experience of well-being and happiness as a balance to the discomfort, you have a choice. You can see and work with these experiences, whatever they are, in a more balanced way. So I think you're on the right track.
Yeah, it certainly is a lot more comfortable than what I was going through before, and it doesn't feel like I'm avoiding anything. I mean, I'm certainly all in favor of people doing everything that they feel capable of doing, to help correct, to try to rebalance the earth. But at the same time, there's some part of me that I'm okay either way. I thought maybe it's just because I'm old. And if I were 20, maybe I wouldn't feel that way.
Well,
But
the things are different when you're older, for one thing, but
Yeah.
also it's what we do and how we respond and has to start with us. And we have, if we don't do the work to have that sense of stability and choice and opening, and we jump into trying to change the world or do things, we'll burn out pretty quick. So yeah, I think you're right.
Thank you, Lindsley. Did I say that correctly?
yes, and Lindsley.
Thank you very much. Anyone in the in-person audience have a question for Maeve? All right.
The first question. Oh, I'm Merle. Is this on? Okay, everybody can hear me. What you were saying that suffering and faith, but I didn't hear you go into great details. That I could understand. I could understand that we all suffer, and that's an easy one. And I can understand because I remember Thich Nhat Hanh said one time that in a very polite way, he said, I do not believe in this kingdom of heaven where it's not here, because where you do not suffer, because if you were in the kingdom of heaven and you did not suffer, then you would have no compassion, and compassion is part of kingdom of heaven. So kingdom of heaven is in the here and the now. So how does that kind of correlate to the suffering and then to the faith? Faith is next.
So another word for faith that is confidence. You know, in the context of what we're talking about, the Buddhist practices. So it's and if you look at, go back to the Four Noble Truths, and the first noble of the Noble Eightfold Path is right understanding. So if we understand the truth of that everything changes, the truth that of impermanence, the truth of how we are impacted by conditioning. The more of that understanding that we have, the more confidence we have, the more we can trust it, and the more we, and in meditation, it's another way, through meditation and having experiences where even if it's 5 seconds where everything falls away, or where you feel this sense of relaxation and peace, that builds a sense of confidence and faith. I know it's there. I've experienced it. I've you know, and I have some understanding of what leads to it, and that comes out of wanting wanting more than just the superficial ways that but more a deeper.
Yeah, the investigation part.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the other thing I wanted to say is on Saturday, I moved recently, and I moved 3 miles from the South Fork, and I bridge, which is the 49 part of the river of the Yuba, and I left late to go for a swim because I, was busy. I got down there at 7 o'clock at night. I've been going down there pretty regular since I was 18. I'm 53, and I walked the path at 7 at night to halfway before Hoyt's, which some people might know where that is, and I saw hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people coming out of there. And I was stepping back, and I was very polite to everybody, and I said hi to everyone, hi. And I got, just kind remarks mostly, and every type of person was coming out of there, every nationality. I had to get out of there by 8:30, so I had to get back to the bridge before it got dark. And then the Rangers were there, and I talked with them about it and I said, I've never in my life, we used to sit under this bridge at 18. And then I said, I've never seen this ever. And he said, either have we were at the Burden last weekend and it was the same thing. And I said, well, will you behold it? And he said, not with this kind of numbers. But yeah, I just was, thinking about when you had that talk last time you were here. And I asked them, well, can't you can you start feeding it or this and that? And he said, well, we have a meeting every Tuesday. I mean, once a month on Tuesdays at the Root Center. You should come. That's not an option right now, but just I can't say that I felt depressed because a lot of these people's eyes were just so bright. Hi, 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 hi. I kept pulling over. Hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? And then I thought, okay, this is so interesting, right? The hundreds of people are here. And so I didn't feel like they didn't deserve to be there, It was just, I don't know. It's a comment really, because you had that talk. I'm going to try to make it to the Root Center for the Tuesday, what talk they talk about the Yuba, and that's just a comment. Thank you.
Yeah, strange. So it's 25 after. We probably
We can do meta. I just wanted to say, so for those of you in person, we could hear Maeve perfectly, but there was a point where Zoom crashed. And so the live audience lost some of the talk. And so I just wanted to thank everyone for coming back, being, persevering and still being here at the end of the meeting. It's so good to see all your faces. So thank you. Yeah, we can go with meta now.
Okay, so just taking a moment. One of the balancing forces to dukkha is gratitude. And the fact that we have all gathered here this evening, the fact that we are opening our hearts to each other, the fact that we are alive and that we are able to be here, all of that are symptoms of supporters of gratitude. So it's helpful to just let your heart feel whatever else goes on in the world. Right this moment, we're here, we're connected, and we can feel the gratitude and joy of that. And with that, we can send these wishes to ourselves. May I live with an open heart and an open mind. May whatever blocks or covers my heart or mind be dissolved, so that through open-heartedness and open-mindedness, I may feel true happiness. May I be healthy in my mind and in my body. May I have peace and ease in the things I need in my life. May I be safe and protected from both inner and outer harm. And may I awaken and be freed from suffering. And as we wish these things for ourselves, realizing the truth of our interconnection, we can feel them strongly and we can let these wishes emanate and expand out into the room, out into this community of the Sangha, out into the larger community of beings that we share our lives with, our friends, our families, our neighbors, people we pass on the streets and in the roads, our, our, our creatures that we share the earth and the waters and the land with. And we let these wishes emanate to them and out into all across this earth, so that we wish that all the beings on this earth may live with open hearts and open minds, may be safe and protected from harm, may have access to peace and ease and the things they need, and that we may all awaken and be free from suffering. And then we say the same wishes out into the universe and beyond, To all beings everywhere, may all beings everywhere be safe, be at peace, and be free. Bong. And Jen.